Welcome everyone to our webinar on small business big impact. This webinar is specifically tailored for small and medium enterprises. My name is Poonam Nagarkoti, Climate Change and Sustainability Advisor at Sustainable Square. And this webinar we are hosting from Sustainable Square in collaboration with the Climate Pledge. Thanks for joining us today. Okay, I'll share my screen for the presentation. Yes. Is it visible? Okay, perfect. So before we dive deep into the today's session discussions, let me go over some quick logistics to help you get the most out of this webinar. This session will run for 1 hour, including a Q&A session at the end. All participants' microphones will be muted, but you can add and submit your questions anytime using the chat feature. We will address them during the Q&A session at the end. If you experience any technical issues, try refreshing your browser or reconnecting and contact to us. This webinar is being recorded. We will share the recording and relevant materials with you after the session. Okay, so all right, well, all of the logistics have been covered. Let's get started. For today's webinar, we have a very compact agenda where we will be discussing why sustainable or the net zero SMEs are important for the environment and what's the benefit for the SMEs to move into that direction, to have the net zero strategy in place and everything. So that we'll discuss first, and then we'll talk about towards the net zero, how SMEs can go ahead, what are the different platforms, and how they can commit to the net zero targets. And then we'll talk about Sustainable Square as an SME, how Sustainable Square has committed to the net zero. And then at the end, we'll have a session from Mathsy Kutty on collaborating to drive climate actions from the Climate Pledge. Well, that covered, we have speakers from Sustainable Square and the Climate Pledge, myself, Poonam Nagarkoti, and I have with me my colleague Dinah Gengmei, who is Senior Climate Change and Sustainability Advisor from Sustainable Square. And from the Climate Pledge, we have Mathsy Kutty, who is Asia Pacific Leader from the Climate Pledge. Moving ahead, before we dive deep into the discussion of why it is important, how to do it for the SMEs towards the net zero, let's understand the urgency. The latest report from the World Economic Forum has flagged the extreme weather events are the biggest long-term threats for the decade. This highlights a clear sign that we need urgent environmental actions in the short term and the long term, plus risks like biodiversity loss, resource shortages, and all these things are at the top of the list for the next decade. So tackling these issues is very, very crucial to build a sustainable future. Moving ahead, I will speak on two things. First is why SMEs are important for net zero future, how it will benefit the environment. And second will be what's for the SMEs to adopt net zero actions. So first and the foremost thing that we need to notice is SMEs are the crucial backbone of most economies. As you can see from this graph, above this diagram, that SMEs contribute heavily towards the economic GDP. And when it comes to the MENA region, it contributes around 60% towards the GDP. With this noticeable economic contribution, SMEs have noticeable environmental footprint as well. All these can be covered under energy demand and emissions, because when manufacturing SMEs, they consume a lot of fossil fuels, they burn it, they emit emissions. So that can be covered under energy demand and emissions, and then resource usage. A lot of mining and the logging industry, they use a lot of woods from the forest. So resource usage impact the environment. And then at the end, we have waste and pollution. After processing all the products within the SMEs, there are a lot of chances that waste and pollution may enter into the environment. So there are three major important impacts on the environment. And when we look at the statistics as well, there are two major statistics which says that SMEs consume 13% of the global energy. And at the industrial level, SMEs contribute to 60 to 70% of the global industrial emissions. This therefore focuses on SMEs as the major pinpoint of the sustainability efforts. Moving ahead, the second important nature of the SMEs is that they are the part of the supply chain. Many big corporations depend on SMEs for their goods and services. And if SMEs adopt sustainable practices, the overall carbon footprint of supply chain can significantly decline. A very interesting fact came up from the CDP study that supply chain emissions of a big company can go up to 26 times higher from their own emissions, which means that if there is a big company who is reliant on SMEs, their own operations can be lesser than their supply chain emissions, which can go up to 26 times higher. And in this graph, you can see material based. Sorry, this is the retail based. Retail based big corporations can contribute 92 times more supply chain emissions as compared to the other big corporations. So if SMEs adopt sustainable practices, the overall carbon footprint of the supply chain can significantly reduce. Moving ahead, there is a very important fact that has been given by the climate pledge that with the 536 signatories who have signed the net zero commitment within the climate pledge, if they reach the net zero target, there will be around 2.5 billion metric tons of carbon dioxide reductions annually, and which is also equivalent to 1/3 of the total carbon absorbed by the world's forest annually. This will greatly benefit the environment if all the signatories will achieve the net zero targets on time. Okay, moving ahead, we have understood that why it is important for the environment to have the sustainable or the net zero SMEs. Now let's move on to what's for the SMEs, why they need to do it, what are the benefits and the important points for them to take care of. So achieving net zero and sustainability offers multiple benefits for SMEs. It opens new growth and innovation opportunities, leads to energy and cost savings. It helps them to be on the forefront of the regulatory compliance. It gives them the market differentiation and customer loyalty. It improves their risk management, gives access to new markets and positive brand value as well. Let's go to each of these pillars one by one. First is energy efficiency. Most common actions taken by the SMEs, which have been given in different reports, different studies, is the energy efficiency measures, which is also the lowest hanging fruit within different organizations across the sector. As per the survey also, 55% SMEs are working towards energy efficiency measure. This has helped them in cutting down their cost and energy as well. This is also backed by one of the very important statistics that with nearly 30% energy consumption reduction, one can get net positive earnings in the long term. And to do this, there are a lot of measures, which you can do it through LED lighting, electric vehicles, smart building systems, and energy management solutions. On the right-hand side, you will also see some real-world examples. For example, from Bella Food Production, it has cut energy use by 25% in its energy consumption with just energy efficient refrigeration and LED lightings. Second is green couriers. What Green Courier is doing, they are transitioning their fleet to the electric vehicle systems and have reduced their total fuel cost to 50%, just halving the fuel cost. And then there are other examples from Tech Hub and EcoPlus team. Tech Hub is doing 140% reduction in their operational costs through going fully remote. And EcoPlus team is a waste management organization which has adopted circular economy model to create new materials towards the reduction of the actual usage of the raw material cost. So many of the SMEs are working towards energy and cost savings, and it is a benefit for them. Moving ahead, sustainable and net zero focused SMEs are having a competitive edge also, and they attract sustainable customers. Big names like IKEA, Johnson Controls, and Walmart are looking for sustainable SMEs to improve efficiency and strengthen their supply chain. A great example, another great example we can say is the SME in India, which is known as Bamboo House India. They are differentiating themselves in the construction industry by using bamboo and other sustainable materials. This has made them a different kind of SME where they are attracting sustainable customers as well. So moving to sustainable and net zero strategy can give you an edge in the market to have market differentiation and sustainable customers. Next is the improved risk management, which means that there are two types of risk, acute and chronic. Acute are basically which you can see in the short term, and chronic are in the long term. A lot of SMEs have been surveyed in England, and it has been concluded that around 45% of the survey of the SMEs out of those 225 SMEs have responded that they are concerned about the possible climate risks. And approximately half of the total surveyed SMEs expect financial impact due to physical risks over 3 to 5 years. This is the concern which SMEs have raised, and it has also been evidenced from one of the hurricane in the past, Hurricane Harvey, that has affected 90% of the affected SMEs 90% of the affected SMEs have experienced revenue losses and incurred significant property damages. But it is also important to know that when you transition towards a net zero, this can help mitigate these risks by reducing exposure to volatile energy prices, extreme weather events, and regulatory changes, which at the end can enhance your overall resilience for these short-term and the long-term risks. Okay, there is one more important thing about the finances. The biggest roadblock of SMEs in the net zero journey is the finance. Most of the SMEs don't get finance on time, don't get adequate finance to move into the sustainability journey platform. But nowadays, investors are increasingly prioritizing sustainability through different green bonds, sustainability linked loans. And in a very recent report of ICC, International Chamber of Commerce of UAE, highlighted that SMEs with the access to sustainable finance are 2.5 times more likely to implement significant sustainability initiatives. So there are more possibility towards the sustainability journey if you get the sustainable finance. And it has also been given in the same report that despite the green finance opportunities of SMEs are valued at around $789 billion, only 2.8% of SMEs have applied for it in the past 3 years. So there is a big gap in getting the sustainability linked loans, and which can be bridged through awareness and accessibility and good communication. Also, there are two examples in this section, which is Future of Forestal. This is a sustainable packaging SME in Germany, which has transitioned its operation to net zero. and secured long-term supply contracts with the global corporations like IKEA for the future. And then there is Allbirds. This SME is specializing in eco-friendly footwear, which has achieved significant market success by committing to carbon neutrality uh, and attracted a loyal customer base of environmentally conscious consumers, enabling them to expand globally and achieve high sales growth. Now, having a sustainability strategy with net zero targets, SMEs can navigate through different regulatory spaces, uh, maybe national or international. And it can also help in supply chain requirements as well to remain competitive in the market and be resilient for the risks, for any kind of risks. There are key policies like European Green Deal, the UAE's net zero 2050 strategy, which underscores the increasing regulatory emphasis on sustainability. International collaborations also exist. For example, EU GCC cooperation on green transition project. All these things helps in emission reduction. And SMEs that align with these regulations can definitely reduce their costs, retrofits at the later stage when these regulatory compliance will become mandatory. Right now, regulatory compliance are not very strict, but at the later end, when the regulatory compliances will become strict, at that time, the early adopters or the pilot SMEs can have the benefit or the competitive edge in the market to avoid costly retrofits later on. Okay, the last thing is also about positive brand value. When you align with net zero strategy, sustainability, you are leading the effort as an SME. This can enhance your reputation and community relationships. Uh, in a survey, it has been mentioned that 73% of the surveyed SMEs, they are prioritizing climate action to enhance their brand reputation. And it has also been evidenced through these two examples at the bottom of the slide. The Seven Star Media Agency in the UK, which is committed to various sustainability programs and has also joined advertisement net zero strategy and supporting the IPA's media climate charters. Um, they have been marked as a responsible and forward thinking company. Second is the base. In the Philippines, this company exists, this SME exists. SME is in the construction industry and they use sustainable material just like Bamboo House India. And they use mud to build homes, which helps reduce carbon emissions and supports the local economies as well. So these efforts strengthen their position in the market and while also helping the community to build their well-being. Now, at the end from my side, I want to highlight one very important policy hack uh, from UAE, UAE Independent Climate Change Accelerator, and the German embassy in the UAE. Uh, they have co-hosted a policy hack titled Empowering SMEs to Drive Supply Chain Decarbonization in the Heavy Industry. And in that, there are different work streams, or you can say it as themes, in which they are focusing on financial incentives and green finance for SMEs, technological innovative solutions for SMEs, policy and incentive for SMEs, MRV system, and the supply chain strategy. So this is in development right now, but it will be out in public very soon with a very strong recommendations across all these work streams. Now we have understood why it is important for the environment, why it is important for the SMEs, and what are the policy structures right now shaping within the UAE. Let's also understand how if SME wants to move ahead and go into the direction of a net zero strategy, how they can do it. SMEs can align with SME Climate Hub, Science Based Target, Exponential Roadmap Initiatives, and Planet Mark. All these platforms help them in developing the net zero strategy and initiatives and committing to the net zero target, basically. And how they can do it, first is piloting the sustainability journey. You have to start understanding your emissions across the boundary of the organization, which can be understood by GAG inventorization. Establish baseline for scope 1 and 2 emissions, understand areas of emissions where the hotspots lying within the organization, where are the more emissions, where are the lesser emissions. You need to understand all of these through GAG inventorization. And then work on the climate actions. Understand the lowest hanging fruit. As I already told, that energy efficiency has been considered as the lowest hanging fruit by a lot of SMEs. And it's working well for them as well to cut their cost. So you need to also understand as an SME to what will work best for you. Second is committing to net zero. As I've already mentioned about the different platforms, you need to commit to net zero through any one of the platform. Specifically, SME Climate Pledge and the Climate Pledge, SME Climate Hub and the Climate Pledge are specifically tailored for the small and medium enterprises. You can look into their resources and different website resources as well to understand how net zero commitment can be built. And then design initiatives, targets around all those net zero commitment, what you have committed through these platforms will require decarbonization efforts as well across your value chain. So that needs to be designed. And once that is done, the third and the most important phase is the implementation of that roadmap. You need to decide on your timeline. You need to decide how you will align with the national and international strategies. That all needs to be developed with the roles and responsibility of the organization within your organization uh, to understand who will do what and within which time period. Okay, now I'll hand over to Dina for our from the Sustainable Squares Net Zero commitment.
Thank you, Poonam, and very welcome to everyone who's joining the webinar. So as Poonam has walked us through the business case and the context of why SMEs should be setting net zero commitments, I will be taking you through the process and the commitment that Sustainable Square as an SME has also established. The next slide, Poonam. Yeah. Before I step into actually in giving you the information on the alignment and also the details of our net zero strategy, Sustainable Square in itself is an advisory firm. We work a lot on sustainability, social impact, climate change, headquartered in Dubai, and we have been serving the clients in the MENA region over the decade now. And as part of one of our climate action, net zero becomes very relevant for us as well to also push the conversation in the market and have a bit of more inspiration within the SMEs and also the companies across all sizes and sectors to join the same journey. So to establish that, we aligned with some of the key initiatives and also the pledges. So SME Climate Hub, we signed to the SME Climate Hub in early 2023. And from that, we also went in the process of committing specifically to the climate pledge. Given that the size of our organization is very small and we have potential opportunities to even achieve net zero early on, right? And as part of the SME Climate Hub, we became the part of the Race to Net Zero initiative of the United Nations. And for the national commitment, we have also pledged to UAE Climate Responsible Companies Pledge. Moving on to the next slide, why we committed to net zero. So as I mentioned, that climate action is one of our key focus areas at Sustainable Square. We do a lot of clientele work, but at the same time, we also have a responsibility to contribute to the emission reduction. SMEs in general are 50% to 64% contributing to the business sector emissions. And considering the size and the nature of our organizations, we also have to commit in ensuring that the emissions reduction strategies that we are developing is aligned to the 1.5 degrees Celsius scenario as well. So in 2024, we declared our net zero commitment. The entire report is also accessible on our web page, so you can access on our website. So our baseline emissions, we decided that we would start doing the complete GHG inventory in 2023, understanding the operations as well as the supply chain that we have. Again, we are a very small company. Our employee count is also up to 50 in numbers. But what we did specifically for our 2023 database, we conducted the full-fledged Scope 3 screening, trying to understand out of 15 categories what would be relevant to us and what data we need to have in place. Having done that, we determined 2023 as a baseline year as well. And our emissions for that year, including Scope 2 and Scope 3, was 49.66 tons CO2e. Again, Scope 1 is not relevant to us because we're not combusting any direct fuel process in our operations. And one of the biggest chunk of our emissions lies under Scope 3 as well. So on the right-hand side, you would find the distribution of our emissions across Scope 2, which is 3.26%. And the remaining emissions are within category 1, 2, 5, 6, 7, the highest being across business travel and employee commuting. So this is how the trajectory of our net zero commitment looks like. 2023 as our base year. Our long-term target is 2030, where we aim to reduce our emissions by 90% for Scope 2 and Scope 3. And our interim target is for 2026, where we aim to reduce our emissions by 60%. Again, the graph that you see here is a linear projection. This is not an ideal, and for the most companies, this will not be a realistic projection as well. But for a company like us and a lot of the other SMEs also, this could be just a very simple and a useful visualization to see like how you can move forward in reducing your emissions. And of course, on an annual basis or in a biannual basis, you also need to keep collecting your emissions data and start monitoring it and make changes as you go along. So in case if we have any operations increasing over the years, and if you foresee any changes within your operations, it's also in the way that you're making investments, you can revise these strategies as well. So our emission reduction target is broken down into two different phases. One is the absolute. So for the Scope 2 and 3, our total emissions reduction is to achieve 90% by 2030. And for the intensity reduction target, which we measure for our employees who are headquartered in Dubai physically, we aim to achieve the intensity reduction target by 97%. Up to our long-term target of 2030. So how have we established our pillars? So we have three different pillars that we have put together. One is for sure to reduce our emissions, right? So emissions reduction strategies, whatever we can reduce, we are going to aim and put initiatives around those sort of emission sources. The second one is offsetting strategies. Again, because our operations are not dependent on Scope 1 source emissions. Scope 2 is also fairly low for us, and most of our emissions are in Scope 3 in our value chain. A lot of emissions reductions are also out of our control, right? So that's why we have also put offsetting strategies as one of the pillars for any unavoidable emissions that we would have in our operations. And the third pillar is a continuous monitoring, reporting, and verification of our strategy. In terms of the roadmap on how we want to achieve our commitments across these three pillars, we have also established 5 different areas where we want to focus. So procurement and waste management, business travel and employee commuting, and sustainable operations. We see that these are the areas where we can reduce our emissions and also have a continuous monitoring and review of the emissions database. So this becomes the part of our first 2 pillars, and some of the areas that we have identified within each of these segments are ensuring that we are practicing conscious procurement wherever necessary. We are also having composting initiatives and recycling efforts as well. When it comes to business travel and employee commuting, which is actually the biggest hotspot of our emissions, we have certain strategic ways of identifying how we want to um, travel more sustainably for our business commitments. And also in 2024, we formalized our hybrid work model, which means that we work from office only thrice a week, and twice a week we are working remotely. In terms of sustainable operations, we are focusing on energy efficiency, um, a green hosting of our website and of the SaaS platform that we have, and also ensuring that our remote employees are also practicing sustainable teleworking. When it comes to offsetting strategies, we have been mindful of what carbon credits are we procuring. So what we do is we conduct due diligence, ensure that all the options that we have in the market are credible and verifiable. So we look at Vera Gold Standard, International Carbon Registry, and UN carbon offsets. And we also ensure to see the core benefits of these credits. For example, to see how do these projects contribute to the sustainable development goals as well. The last one is the thought leadership. So basically, this is where we position our advisory strength and ensure that we are using our position to have a wider client engagements and enhancing climate communications as well. As part of a net zero commitment and strategy, we eventually also developed our own green office policy, onboarding all our employees on our net zero commitment, and also tapping into some certain other environmental concerns as well. So what our recommendations are for the SMEs of similar sizes and probably the sectors that aligns with Sustainable Square. We recommend that each organization should conduct a proper benchmarking to understand sectoral context and also to understand what could be the potential emission sources that they should be including. Capitalize on publicly available tools. Sustainable Square has also used SBTi's net zero tool. It's freely available on their website. And once you have your emissions data, it will also give you projections for the near and long term. The third one is defining pillars to your net zero journey and ensuring that it aligns with the corporate strategy that you have as an organization. And no matter how small your organization is, always conduct a formal and detailed GHG inventory process. And last but not the least, always ensure that you are annually monitoring and reporting your emissions. So that's from my end. If you have any questions on a Sustainable Square's net zero commitment, feel free to drop your questions. Handing over to you, Poonam.
Thanks, Tina. Now, Mathsy Kutty from the Climate Pledge will take care of her part on collaborating to drive actions. Mathsy, to you.
Thank you so much, Poonam. Do you want to bring up the slides just to my slides? Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Maybe while Poonam brings up my slides, just by way of quick introduction, I'm a part of the Climate Pledge team at Amazon, and I lead the Asia Pacific Charter, so trying to work with the signatories of the pledge in driving climate action. So as you can rightly see, the presentation is called Collaborating to Drive Climate Action. If you can just go to the next slide, please. Yes, thank you. Um, you know, one thing that I think through the presentation that we've had today, one thing that has been clear is that there is a need for all of us to take action, right? Irrespective of if you're a large company or a small company, everyone needs to take action if we need to manage the situation today. I mean, I don't like to say this, but it's almost, one of the terms that was used was it's code red for humanity. This is what the UN used, right? Because things are spiraling out of control. And if you've tracked the reports that have come up from the scientists and agencies like the IPCC, it says that there's only a 66% chance that we can limit the global temperature rise to well below 1.5 degrees, right? And that's only possible if all of us meet net zero by 2050. Right. So it's clearly important that all of us need to take action. And really, this has been the basis of why the climate pledge was founded as well, right? So as Amazon was thinking through its own emissions and looking at how we can look at reducing the impact of our operations on the environment, on the community, we realized that irrespective of how big we are, no one company can do this alone. It is important for us to garner as much corporates, while the governments are doing their job. I think the corporate leadership, both large brands and small brands, need to take action. And that was the genesis of the Climate Pledge. So we co-founded the pledge in September of 2019, where we said the pledge is a commitment to meet the goals of the Paris Agreement 10 years ahead of the timelines that were defined under Paris. So 2040 is the timeline for net zero commitment under the Climate Pledge. And as we co-founded this with Global Optimism, we also became the first signatory to the Climate Pledge as well, right? Now, before I go into details of what does it really mean to be a signatory and what are the benefits, etc., we just have a quick video that we wanted to show you. So Poonam, if you could just navigate to that and see if it's, yeah.
Let me know if the sound can hear. Can you hear?
No.
No, the audio is not working.
Okay, let me do one thing. Let me go ahead and share my screen quickly. Yeah. And yes. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes.
It should be a blank screen, but I'm just going to bring it up. And let me know if you're able to hear the audio. I'm not on the screen, so you might have to just tell me aloud. This is working?
It's working. It's working. Yeah.
All right.
Winning slowly on climate change is the same as losing, so we always need to accelerate action. The Climate Pledge members have set an ambitious goal to be net zero by 2040, and we're beginning to see what happens when committed companies come together and take shared action.
This work is hard. It's not clear. Often the answers aren't linear or straightforward, and it helps to have friends and partners that you can learn from.
We think about the power of partnerships. We cannot do this alone.
In just 5 years, we've had over 525 companies join us as signatories, and the results are tremendous.
According to new analysis from Brody, together, this group has the potential to help avoid more than 2.5 gigatons of greenhouse gas emissions.
That's roughly equivalent to the carbon absorbed by 1/3 of the world's forests.
There is a learning and sharing atmosphere that is created by the Climate Pledge that allows these companies to be much faster in their emission reduction efforts than other companies that are trying to do it on their own.
We're coming together and we're sharing how we're doing this for the betterment of the planet.
We want to be part of a movement that changes how product is made.
It's not just about getting something from point A to point B, but also getting it there with the least climate impact.
Profitability and sustainability can go hand in hand.
That is the basis of the future of business. That collaboration is essential.
We're seeing costs for clean energy come down, cities being transformed, nature is being restored all over the world.
This is still within our grasp, but this is the critical decade and we need to ensure that we accelerate now.
We are defining the quality of life for all future generations, and it is a huge responsibility that we can and must stand up to.
We get to imagine and build a more sustainable future.
I believe that all of us coming together can solve the biggest fight of our lives.
I hope that video just gave you a good sense of what the Climate Pledge has been doing and, just the overall, idea or the thinking behind the Climate Pledge being co-founded as well. So while, Poonam brings up the slides again, I next wanted to kind of quickly touch upon what does it really mean to become a signatory to the Climate Pledge, right? When we say companies are joining us and taking on this commitment, what are those specific commitments? Over and above getting to net zero by 2040, there are three main pillars, if I may, to the becoming a signatory, right? To the commitment of the pledge. The first one is regular reporting. Second is carbon elimination. And third is the offsets. And you would see this is very similar to what I think Poonam presented earlier. I'm not sure around the pillars that Sustainable Square has defined for themselves in terms of their net zero strategy, right? The regular reporting piece is essentially just telling companies to start measuring and reporting your emissions publicly. Unless you know where your emissions are, there's no way you're going to be able to manage it, right? And you must have heard this several times. So the first one is to report your emissions, measure and report your emissions so that you also have a sense of where are your hotspots? What are the areas where you can actually bring down your emissions? And what are the ones where even with a large effort, the emission reduction is going to be very, very minor or meager, right? So just figuring that out and publicly reporting it. The second one is carbon elimination or decarbonization in simple terms. Here, we are requesting all our signatories to go ahead and look at decarbonization strategies to bring down their emissions to the maximum extent possible. And by this, what we mean is, is there a way you can rethink your operations, your business, your strategy, right? And that could mean instead of using your regular grid-based electricity, is there a way for you to transition to clean energy, right? Solar-based or wind-based or other renewable sources of energy, or maybe just the processes that you use, the raw materials that you use, or the way your products or products are moved or raw materials are moved from point A to point B. Can you look at electrifying or decarbonizing your transportation? So those are the things that we're asking companies to look at. And then the third piece, of course, is offsets, which is, not everything is under your total control. There are certain things which are outside your scope of emissions, in the sense outside your boundary, sorry. And for you to try and drive decarbonization measures, there's limited influence that you might have, or probably it's much harder. So there are certain things which, you might need to depend on offsets. And the requirement here is that companies look at credible carbon offsets that are additional, that are real, that are quantifiable, and where possible, if they can have socially beneficial, socioeconomic benefits as well, those would be like the perfect offsets that we would consider. If you could just move to the next slide, please. Now, with these requirements in mind, I just wanted to give you an overview of how many companies we are as of today. I think in the video, we spoke about 525 signatories, which was 3 months ago. And today we are at about 550 plus signatories globally. And if you look at the slide right now, you would see that there's a whole host of companies that are there, right? There are big brands, there are small brands, there are brands across multiple sectors as well. There's retail industry, there's the IT industry, there's the pharma industry, there's finance, there's e-commerce. So you would see that companies have realized that irrespective of which sector or which geography they are based in, some of the transition, the carbon elimination pillar that I spoke about earlier, a lot of them could be similar for companies, right? Like if you were to talk about, let's say, renewable energy transition, I'm sure a lot of companies have that as one of the main pillars of decarbonization, right? So maybe there is value in working together, and that's what these 550 companies have realized. And so just if you move to the next slide, I just wanted to give you like a split of where these companies are based, etc. Right? So right now, these are based across 45 countries, and industry sector wise, these are about 60 plus industries that they represent, right? And an interesting fact for y'all in the audience is to know that almost 50% of our signatory base is small and medium businesses. And I don't think, after all the presentation, there's a need for me to go into why that is important, because even if you're a large brand, your scope 3 emissions are dependent on small and medium businesses. And when these large brands are taking these commitments, what it also means is it is going to translate down to the supply chain, to the value chain, and companies that are servicing anything for these large brands, because they're going to be very conscious about who they're going to work with, because they themselves have a net zero commitment, right? So we're also seeing that awareness between the small and medium businesses, which is why you see that about 50% of our member base is SMEs as such. And just a quick stat around the employees. And the reason why we like to talk about this is because when we represent these 450 plus companies, 550, companies represent over 15 million employees. And the reason this is important is because when we drive a system change within an organization, right, and you build sustainability strategies into the normal day-to-day operations, what you're also able to do as a company is influence the thinking and the thinking of the employees there, right? You're imbibing the sustainability principles into the employees. And if you're doing it well, even if a small percentage of your employees are inspired by this, imagine they're going back home and they're also becoming ambassadors for their families, right? So you're creating 15 million plus ambassadors for change that is needed, because even if companies or countries do their bit and the people on here do not do their bit, it's not enough. Everyone needs to do their bit back home as well as in the organization, right? So that's the that's the feeler that I did want to bring in here. Quickly rushing into what does it really mean when you partner with the Climate Pledge? Just the reality is that, we don't really have too much time to waste, right? There's no time for the Climate Pledge to say, hey, you know what, I'm going to start everything from scratch and figure out what the science behind this is, what the probable opportunities are. That means we're going to waste a lot of time. We don't want to reinvent the wheel, which is why we partnered with a lot of the leading organizations. We're very proud of these partnerships. So we have We Mean Business Coalition. You would have heard them about from the RE100 and the EV100 initiatives. We have the Science Based Target Initiative, SME Climate Hub, which Sustainable Square already spoke about earlier. There's a TED Countdown that we've partnered with, and Nature Conservancy. So what we're trying to do here essentially is we're trying to leverage all the work that has already been done by climate change experts and scientists in this space for the last 2 decades plus, right? We don't need to reinvent it. We leverage all the knowledge that there is. And this helps you as an organization also to be able to not go through everything from scratch and leverage all the information, the tools, the resources, etc., that can actually help you move much ahead as you become a signatory. So this is a good segue into what the benefits of joining the pledge are. If you can, Poonam, move to the next slide, please. This is the last slide that I have, but an important one, I would say. The benefits of joining the pledge. There are 4 major benefits that I would say of joining the pledge. But essentially, you become a part of a community that's wanting to move the farthest, but also the fastest, right? We want to get to net zero by 2040, and we want to get there as a community, right? So that's the biggest advantage of being a signatory to the pledge. But if I had to really bucket them into 4 categories, then The first would be joint action. This is really close to my heart because at the end of the day, companies can take and declare ambitions, but if you don't do anything about it, and if the platform is just to declare your ambitions, it doesn't really add too much value. We as the Climate Pledge want to have this as an initiative that actually drives climate action. When I say drives climate action on the ground, we really want to have actual projects on the ground. Like when companies say they want to get to net zero, what are really their challenges when they talk about clean energy or transportation or circular economy? What specifically are the challenges? So, how can we bring two or more companies that have similar challenges and who are trying to pilot new things or test new things instead of doing it individually as a company? How can we combine the efforts? How can we cross-utilize resources? How can we leverage each other's knowledge to drive some of these projects? So I'll just give you a very quick example of what this could mean. One of the projects that I'm working on in India and Vietnam right now is around supplier decarbonization for the textile sector, right? A lot of the textile brands have huge commitments and they're working with small and medium businesses globally. A lot of them are present in Asia Pacific region, right? Now, if they have to drive this decarbonization measures, they're struggling to find out, Levi's is coming up with their own requirement and Gap is coming up with their own requirement. Nike is coming up with their own requirement. And for these suppliers, it just becomes very challenging because, every brand is asking for data and reporting, but the supplier themselves are like, I don't really know what needs to be done. Can you help me understand what decarbonization is? And so the project that we're doing is using renewable energy as a lever to drive decarbonization for supply chain. So what we're doing is we've gathered all these brands together, and as opposed to these brands investing millions of dollars on, training these suppliers and asking all of these suppliers to do separate reporting, we said, can we consolidate all of this? Let's do, as an initiative, let's do a simple shared training program. We will understand what the gaps are and help you for India. What does it mean to transition to renewable energy? What are your options? Is it rooftop solar? Is it aggregated power purchase agreement? Is it RECs or renewable energy credits that can be taken? So there could be opportunities like that. Or then moving on to, let's say they've figured out what does this really mean to shift to renewable energy. How do we even bring those solutions to them? Sometimes these small and medium businesses are so, in terms of their demand for energy, it could be very small. So the large players, the renewable energy providers, are not really interested to negotiate with them. And so it ends up being very expensive for suppliers, right? Through the project, what we're trying to do is we're trying to aggregate the demand, and it could happen in multiple ways. If it's rooftop solar, then we're aggregating demand for the solar PVs. Similarly, for your, sorry, I just noticed the time and I realized we just have another 2 minutes. So I'm going to quickly go into, so essentially what the joint action does is, collaborate and cross-utilize resources, making it more efficient for everyone to run projects. So this was a renewable energy project. We're doing projects around transport. We're doing projects around circular economy and supply chain, all of those. So the biggest reason you should join the pledge would be the joint action opportunities. And then the other three are very self-explanatory. You're looking at, having access to best practices, knowledge sharing. We create a platform. We have created an online platform for signatories where you're able to access some of these information, and we conduct webinars and sessions like these so that we can share knowledge. The third one is access to communities as well, right? We have a lot of climate events that are happening globally. So TCP has a presence in these, and we invite all our signatories so that they can meet and network with companies, leaders that have taken up similar goals to exchange ideas and, accelerate their journey as well. And fourth, an important one is also the amplification of your climate leadership. A lot of times what we've seen is that companies might be doing some really good work, but they might be just, people in that country or city might know about it, or in that sector might know about it. It is important for us to bring global visibility to these projects as well, so that your climate leadership can influence and inspire more companies, more corporates, more individuals to take action. So we try and help amplify your climate leadership through various forums that we have, various blogs and various campaigns that we run, so that you can help inspire more companies. And that on dot is my last slide. And just a last call to action, like if anyone would like to join the pledge and have any questions, this is our website. You can reach out to me on the mail ID that is showing up, flashing on the screen. And yes, I don't think we have time for questions, but I'll hand it over to Poonam. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Mathsy. You have covered everything well on time. Do we have questions, Lakshmi?
Yes. So we have one question so far. Two now. So I think the first question I directed to Dinah. So the question is, it has two parts to it. The first aspect being, with rising geopolitical tensions and the US exit from the Paris Agreement, what impacts does it have on ESG and sustainability trends, and what challenges does that come on to as consultants to us at Sustainable Square? And also, do we support clients in finding investors or financiers?
Thank you for those questions, Vishal. Very good question. And I think it's one of the hot topics as well, with the US taking the exit. However, in our experience and also working closely with the clients, I think it's very clear that eventually the actions on climate change or climate mitigation is more so on company levels. And even looking at the context of Middle East that we haven't seen much of an impact, at least directly, on the conversations and actions around ESG, sustainability, and climate change. Even if you see with the exit that US has taken from the Paris Agreement, there are still other organizations who are trying to compensate and continue the journey that US has previously pledged to, right? You must have heard about the news that Bloomberg has also committed to bridge the finance gap that occurred also due to the exit. And also because our clientele base is more so focused in the Middle East region, we have only seen the climate action going on an accelerated pace. And the recent queries that we have also received from some of the European markets are also very well matured currently. Your next question, which is, does Sustainable Square support clients in finding investors? No, that is not a scope of our services currently.
Dinah, we have one last question, and that's more so on if any of us have any experience or any case studies in which a construction industry or subcontractors have been successful in implementing any sustainability initiatives, specifically in the
Specifically in UAE. Okay. We have case studies around the world, but specifically in UAE, we have to see also. But we can send if there are some, like from around the world, we can send, obviously. So thank you, everyone. I think these are the questions, and thank you for joining our webinar today. We'll send all the relevant materials and the case study after the webinar. We'll stay in touch. Thank you.
Thank you.
Everyone, thank you.